Before humanity ever took a breath, a war was already raging in the heavens. Imagine a silence so absolute it predates light itself. Then picture that silence broken, not by thunder or by the clash of metal, but by a fracture in the very order of being. A rebellion born in brilliance, a figure of light lifting his voice, questioning the architecture of the cosmos. A host divides, choirs become legions. The first conflict in history is not recorded in clay or blood, but in the language of angels. This is not an allegory we tell to children by candlelight. It is an ancient story that sits at the edge of scripture and myth, glimpsed in forbidden fragments, whispered in the margins of Apocrypha. It is a tale of radiance turned to revolt, of the morning star who would not bow, and of the celestial armies called to choose between obedience and a dangerous consuming pride. Close your eyes. Hear the drums of a war fought with will and song. Hear the tremor in the heavens when a being of perfect light dares to say, "I will ascend. I will be like the Most High." Imagine the moment when loyalty cleaves into dissent, when a single idea becomes contagious and 1/3 of the heavenly order answers a call that will echo through millennia. What if the oldest story of insurrection is not merely about punishment or exile? What if it is the origin story of choice? The first instance, the universe confronted freedom and the consequences that followed? What if the war in heaven shaped the moral imagination of every culture that came after, framing how we think of power, rebellion, and the cost of knowing? Tonight we open a book that many have closed. We trace the footprints of a rebellion that theologians preferred to simplify and authorities often preferred to forget. We follow ancient whispers from the Book of Enoch to scattered Gnostic fragments. And we ask a dangerous question: was Lucifer the ultimate villain, or the first tragic hero in a drama the cosmos itself could not avoid? If the first war did not take place on Earth, then perhaps its aftermath still lives inside us. In every defiant decision, every dream of ascent, and every fallen ambition. And so we begin. Not with men, but with angels. Not with cities, but with a choice. Long before the birth of man, before oceans carved their blue across the void, the kingdom of heaven was a realm of absolute harmony, a place where light was not merely illumination, but consciousness itself. Every being that dwelled there sang in one voice, echoing the will of the Creator. Order was flawless, hierarchy was divine. Among the countless choirs of angels, one stood apart, radiant beyond compare, his brilliance unmatched. His name was Lucifer, the light bringer. He was not darkness incarnate, but the epitome of light, the reflection of divine beauty and intellect. His presence commanded awe, his music shaped the heavens. If perfection could be personified, it was him. But perfection bears a quiet danger. To see everything, to understand the symmetry of creation, is to feel the faintest pulse of self-awareness. And in Lucifer's heart, that awareness bloomed into a question. If I am made of divine light, then why must I bow to it? The ancients once wrote that God created beings of pure will, creatures not bound by flesh, but by choice. And perhaps in that gift lay the seed of rebellion. For will, once given, cannot be contained. In the Book of Enoch, the rebellion is hinted at, not as an act of evil, but as a clash of understanding. The light that questioned authority versus the light that submitted to it. Heaven itself became a paradox. Obedience was virtue, but so was wisdom. And Lucifer, the morning star, believed that true devotion required freedom, not servitude. The divine order trembled. Murmurs spread among the hosts, whispers of a new hierarchy, one not bound by a single will. Some angels listened in silence, others felt the same pull, the longing to know, to choose, to create as their Creator did. What followed was not a scream, nor a strike of swords. It was the sound of dissonance, harmony breaking, a single note out of tune in heaven's eternal song. And that discord, once born, could never be silenced. The forbidden tale begins here, not in hatred, but in longing, not in darkness, but in the unbearable brightness of self-awareness. And as the first shadow fell across the throne of light, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. At first, it was not a war of blades or blood. It was a war of conviction. The heavens trembled under the weight of an idea too dangerous to contain. Lucifer, once the radiant conductor of heaven's music, no longer sang in harmony. His song now rose in counterpoint, proud, beautiful, defiant. In his voice, others found resonance. From every corner of the celestial realms, angels paused, uncertain. Many turned away in grief, but some listened and believed. They gathered around the morning star, not out of hatred, but out of hope. They whispered of freedom, of a new order not built on obedience, but on knowledge. Then came the moment of decision, the line that split eternity. The archangel Michael, the champion of the throne, stepped forth. His armor shone with the unyielding brilliance of divine justice. Between him and Lucifer, the light itself seemed to falter, as if heaven's own essence recoiled at the division of its children. And then, heaven fell silent. The silence broke, not by sound, but by energy, an explosion of creation's raw power. Legions collided in storms of radiant fire. Choirs became armies, their hymns twisted into war chants. Wings of light struck against wings of flame. The air, if heaven could have air, burned with truth and contradiction. Lucifer's host fought with elegance and fury, their beauty undimmed even as they defied the source. They wielded the power of their origin, light, turning it into weapons of defiance. Michael's forces moved with perfect symmetry, guided by divine command. It was not hatred that fueled them, but sorrow. Sorrow for what must be done. Time did not exist in this battle. Days, moments, eternities, all folded into one. The war stretched across dimensions, from the highest firmament to the edge of creation's void. And there, at the heart of the storm, stood the two brightest lights in existence. Lucifer, the son of the morning, and Michael, the defender of heaven. Their confrontation was not one of rage, but of inevitability. Each saw in the other what they could never destroy, purpose. Lucifer's voice thundered through the infinite halls. Freedom is not rebellion. It is the reflection of what we were made to be. And Michael answered, his tone solemn. Freedom without order is chaos. Even light without balance consumes itself. Their blade, not of metal but of pure will, collided. Reality screamed, constellations bent, galaxies dimmed for a heartbeat. Then came the moment of fall. Lucifer's light fractured, cascading through the void like a dying star. 1/3 of heaven's host followed him, their wings torn, their radiance bleeding into shadow. They were cast out, not destroyed, but transformed. Light became memory, memory became myth. As they fell, their cries stitched themselves into the fabric of creation, an echo that would later haunt human dreams, scripture, and art. Heaven was silent once more, but the silence was not peace, it was loss. For even victory in heaven comes at a price, and somewhere in the endless dark below, a fallen light still burned, faint, distant, unyielding. The first war was over, but the consequences of it had only just begun. The story of the war in heaven, as we know it, is not found in full within the Bible. The book of Revelation offers only fragments. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and they were cast out. But between those lines of light and darkness lies a silence too deliberate to ignore, a void where entire truths once lived, now erased or forbidden. Across centuries, whispers of that missing story surfaced in texts the church would later call apocrypha, books outside the canon. Among them was the Book of Enoch, an ancient account that dares to describe what heaven looked like before the fall. In it, angels are not ethereal saints, but sentient powers, capable of love, envy, even curiosity. Enoch speaks of the Watchers, divine beings who descended to earth, bringing knowledge meant for the heavens, metallurgy, astronomy, the hidden arts of creation. For this defiance, they too were cast down. But what if these Watchers were not a separate order of angels, but the fallen host themselves? What if the rebellion of Lucifer was not a single event, but a continuum, a cosmic descent from perfect order into the chaos of human history. In the Gnostic Gospels, especially the Apocryphon of John, the story takes on another face entirely. There, the figure of the light-bearer is not a villain, but a necessary catalyst. He becomes a symbol of divine knowledge, the spark that breaks the prison of ignorance. To the Gnostics, Lucifer's fall was not a tragedy, but an act of awakening, a rebellion not against God himself, but against the tyranny of blindness. And then there is the Gospel of Judas, discovered in the Egyptian desert, a text that turned everything upside down. In its cryptic lines, Judas is not a betrayer, but the one who understands Christ's hidden purpose, that the act of betrayal was part of the design, necessary to free the divine spark trapped in matter. If Judas, the reviled, could be recast as the enlightened, then perhaps Lucifer, too, was never the enemy, but the mirror of divine intent misunderstood. The ancient mystics believed that truth could never be destroyed, only hidden, scattered like shards of light through forbidden scriptures. And in those fragments, one theme echoes again and again. The war in heaven was never about evil versus good, but knowledge versus obedience. What if the fall was not a fall at all, but a transformation, the universe's way of balancing creation with consciousness? For every being of pure light, a shadow must exist, not as its opposite, but as its reflection. Modern theologians rarely speak of this. To question the nature of the first rebellion is to question the very foundation of divine order. And yet the ancient symbols, the serpent, the morning star, the forbidden fruit, all point to one truth. Humanity's hunger for knowledge began long before Adam ever touched the tree. Perhaps the forbidden fruit was not on earth. Perhaps it was tasted first in heaven. What if the war in heaven was never about good and evil at all, but about the paradox of creation itself? A paradox that says, you cannot make beings capable of love without also making them capable of rebellion. Lucifer's defiance, then, becomes something more than treachery. It becomes the inevitable consequence of free will, the divine experiment that allowed choice to exist. In that light, Lucifer is not the destroyer of harmony, but its first true participant, the first to test the boundaries of perfection. He represents something terrifying to any system built on order: conscious self-awareness. The moment an angel looked inward and said, I, heaven changed forever. For in the instant that one recognizes the self, obedience can no longer be automatic. It must be chosen. This is the essence of the forbidden history. God did not lose control, he allowed it to happen. Because a universe without rebellion would be a universe without freedom. And freedom, even when it fractures the light, is sacred. The philosophers of the early Gnostics saw Lucifer as a symbol of divine dialectic, the necessary opposition that makes truth visible. They called it the tension between light and shadow, where understanding is born. Even in darkness, light finds purpose. Even in defiance, creation continues. When humanity appeared, that celestial war did not end. It descended. Every human being carries within them the echo of that first conflict, the desire to obey and the yearning to transcend, the impulse to kneel and the hunger to rise. It is not merely a myth of angels. It is the blueprint of the human condition. We see it in every act of rebellion that reshaped civilization. Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, Eve reaching for the forbidden fruit, the thinkers who challenged kingdoms and churches alike. Each of them carried a fragment of that same light, the light that questions, the light that disobeys in the name of understanding. To call Lucifer evil is to see only the surface. To call him good is to misunderstand his role. He is neither, he is necessary. For what is light if it cannot cast a shadow? And perhaps the true meaning of the war in heaven is not to condemn rebellion, but to remind us that even perfection must evolve, that every divine order must face the mirror of its own creation. Heaven's greatest tragedy, then, was not the fall of Lucifer, but the refusal to understand why he fell. The morning star did not seek to destroy light, wrote one forgotten mystic. He sought to know it, and in knowing he became separate, so that others might one day understand. In that sense, the war in heaven is still being fought, in classrooms, in churches, in the silence of our own thoughts. Every time a being of light asks, why? Every civilization, every religion, every heart seems haunted by the same memory. A paradise lost, a rebellion born from pride, a longing for redemption. The ancients didn't see heaven and hell as mere destinations. They saw them as reflections of the human spirit, of consciousness itself. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, the children of light and the children of darkness were not just armies. They represented two forces locked within the same soul. Light, the will to create. Darkness, the will to dominate. Both eternal, both necessary. Perhaps Lucifer's fall was not the story of evil's birth, but the story of freedom's curse. The moment consciousness first learned to question, to choose, to define its own destiny. And maybe that's what made us human. For we carry within us the same spark that once defied heaven, the same fire that longs to return home, and every act of love, every sacrifice, every prayer whispered into the dark. Is another angel choosing to rise again? So when we speak of heaven, we're not speaking of a place above the clouds, but a memory of who we were before the fall. And hell? It's not a pit beneath our feet. It's the absence of that memory, the forgetting of the divine within us. In the end, maybe salvation isn't about winning the war, but remembering the truth, that heaven and hell are not separate worlds. They are the twin reflections of the same eternal soul, still fighting to awaken.